This fisherman thought he spotted driftwood in the ocean until he looked closer and realized it was moving against the current. What he found next will leave you speechless. A German shepherd, barely alive, swimming in the middle of nowhere with no boat in sight. But the real shock came after the rescue when they discovered this wasn't just any dog. This canine had a dark secret that even the military wanted buried. What happened next? You won't believe the truth. The morning sun rose lazily over the Atlantic, painting the endless expanse of water in shimmering gold and deep blue. Thomas Grady stood at the helm of his modest fishing boat, the Marlin's Wake, squinting against the glare reflecting off the glassy surface. At 42, his face bore the weathered lines of 2 decades spent under the punishing sun, his hands calloused from years of handling ropes and nets. Today's expedition had begun like any other. Before dawn, with a thermos of strong black coffee and the quiet hum of the diesel engine beneath his feet. But as the hours passed with barely a nibble on his lines, Thomas felt that peculiar itch between his shoulder blades that seasoned fishermen know all too well. The ocean was holding its breath. There was something unnatural about this calm. The water lay flat as a mill pond, not a ripple disturbing its surface, except for the occasional swell rolling in from deeper waters. Even the gulls were silent, their usual raucous cries absent from the empty sky. Thomas wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and checked his instruments again. The fish finder showed only scattered, uninterested blips. His radio crackled with static between the Coast Guard's automated weather reports. He'd been out here 6 hours already, and his cooler remained stubbornly empty. He was about to turn back when movement caught his eye, a dark shape bobbing about 200 yards off the starboard bow. At first glance, it looked like debris, maybe a piece of driftwood or a lost fishing crate, but something about its movement seemed wrong. Thomas reached for his binoculars, the familiar weight of them in his hands as he adjusted the focus. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was a dog. A German shepherd, its powerful body barely keeping afloat in the vast expanse of blue. The animal's fur was matted with salt, its legs moving in exhausted, jerky strokes as it fought to keep its head above water. Its mouth opened and closed rhythmically, gasping for air between the swells. Thomas's mind reeled at the impossibility. They were 135 miles from the nearest coastline, farther than any dog could possibly swim. No boats in sight, no life jacket, no wreckage. Just this magnificent animal alone in the merciless sea. Thomas didn't hesitate. He killed the engine, the sudden silence pressing in around him like a physical presence. Grabbing a coiled rescue rope, he quickly tied one end to the boat's cleat before stripping off his shirt. The water temperature gauge read 72 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia if he stayed in too long. He tossed the rope ladder over the side, its aluminum rungs clanging against the hull. "Hold on, buddy," he shouted, though he doubted the dog could hear him over the waves. "I'm coming." The shock of the water hit him like a punch to the chest as he plunged in. Salt stung his eyes and the cold stole his breath, but Thomas powered forward with strong, practiced strokes. The distance seemed to stretch impossibly as waves lifted him up and dropped him down again. Each time he crested a swell, he caught sight of the struggling dog, its movements growing weaker by the second. When Thomas finally reached him, the German shepherd's legs gave out completely. Those intelligent amber eyes locked onto Thomas's face with a look of exhausted gratitude before the massive body went limp. Wrapping one arm around the dog's chest, Thomas fought against the current to drag them both back to the boat. The latter swayed dangerously as he heaved the 90-pound animal onto the deck, then pulled himself up after, collapsing onto the sun-warmed fiberglass, gasping for air. The dog lay motionless, except for the rapid rise and fall of its rib cage. Thomas quickly checked for injuries. The paws were raw from hours of swimming, the pads cracked and bleeding. Salt crystals crusted its fur. and its gums were pale. Wrapping the shivering animal in a dry tarp, Thomas poured fresh water into his cupped hand, letting the dog lap weakly. As he turned the boat toward shore, the questions circled in his mind like sharks. How had a German Shepherd ended up 135 miles offshore? Who had abandoned him? And most chilling of all, why had this remarkable animal been swimming for his life in the middle of nowhere? The answers, Thomas suspected, would be far more extraordinary than the rescue itself. Part 2. The mystery deepens. A dog with a military past. The fluorescent lights of the Clearwater Marine Clinic buzzed overhead as Thomas paced the waiting room, leaving damp footprints on the linoleum. His clothes still reeked of salt water, and his hair had dried in stiff, salty spikes. The veterinary technician had taken one look at the half-drowned German Shepherd and rushed him straight to the back without a word. Dr. Melissa Chen emerged nearly an hour later, her scrub splashed with water and her expression a mix of amazement and concern. "You weren't exaggerating about where you found him," she said, shaking her head. She held up a clipboard with the dog's vitals. "Severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalances consistent with prolonged saltwater exposure, and his paws." She trailed off, showing Thomas the photos. The pads were shredded, the nails cracked down to the quick. "But he'll recover?" Thomas asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. Dr. Chen nodded. "With time and rest. But there's something else." She handed Thomas a small plastic bag containing the rusted metal fragment they'd found matted in the dog's thick fur. "This appears to be part of a military-style dog tag. We cleaned it up as best we could. There's just a single letter visible now." Thomas turned the jagged piece of metal in his fingers, squinting at the faintly etched R still visible. The implication sent a chill down his spine. He'd suspected this wasn't an ordinary pet, but concrete evidence of a military connection raised far more questions than it answered. After paying the bill and collecting his unexpected passenger, Thomas drove home through the gathering dusk. The dog sprawled weakly across the back seat of his pickup truck. His small beachside cottage seemed suddenly too quiet as he settled the dog, whom he'd started calling Ranger, onto a nest of blankets in the living room. Over the next few days, Thomas observed behaviors that confirmed his suspicions. Ranger never barked at passing cars or the mailman. He ignored basic commands like sit or stay when spoken, but responded instantly to subtle hand signals Thomas happened to try out of curiosity. Most telling was his reaction to the sound of helicopters. Whenever one passed overhead, Ranger's entire body would tense, his ears flattening as he dropped into a low crouch, scanning the sky with focused intensity. Thomas decided to call in an old favor from Mike Reynolds, a former Navy K-9 handler he'd served with years ago. When Mike arrived and saw Ranger's reaction to a series of tactical hand signals, his face grew grim. "This dog has advanced combat training," Mike said quietly. "That focused stare, the way he scans for threats. This is a working military dog, probably special ops." He demonstrated a complex series of hand motions, and to Thomas's astonishment, Ranger immediately assumed a perfect guard position by the door. That night, Thomas dug out his old laptop and used military credentials he hadn't accessed in years. What he found in the restricted database turned his blood to ice. Operation Nightmark, Asset R7. Status, terminated. The dates aligned perfectly with when he'd found Ranger adrift. They hadn't lost him. They'd tried to erase him. As Thomas stared at the screen, headlights swept across his living room window. Through the blinds, he could make out the silhouette of a black SUV idling at the end of his driveway. The crunch of gravel under tires snapped Thomas to full alertness. Through the slats of his blinds, he counted two dark figures emerging from the idling SUV, their movements efficient and practiced. Ranger was already at his side, muscles taut, a low growl rumbling in his chest that Thomas felt more than heard. The digital clock on the microwave read 3:17 a.m. No one made friendly visits at this hour. Thomas's military training kicked in as he quickly assessed options. Back door to the woods, his truck parked behind the house, the Glock in his nightstand. "Come on, boy," he whispered, grabbing his keys and the pistol. Ranger moved silently beside him as they slipped out the rear entrance, just as the front door splintered under someone's boot. The humid Florida night swallowed them as they sprinted for the tree line, the shouts of their pursuers muffled by the thick foliage. Thomas's truck started on the first turn of the key, and they fishtailed onto the dirt road leading away from the coast. But their escape wasn't to be so simple. The distinctive hump of rotor blades grew louder until a black helicopter descended like some predatory bird, its searchlight sweeping the road ahead. Thomas slammed the brakes as three figures rappelled down, blocking their path. The lead man removed his night vision goggles, revealing cold eyes that locked onto Ranger with disturbing intensity. "Asset R7, the man called, his voice carrying over the rotor noise. "Stand down." When Ranger hesitated, the man produced a small electronic device. The high-pitched whine it emitted made Thomas wince, but Ranger collapsed as if struck, writhing in apparent agony. The handler's mouth twisted in a cruel smile. Neural reconditioning tone brings them right back to basics. Something in Thomas broke seeing Ranger's pain. In one fluid motion, he raised his pistol and shot the device from the handler's hand. The sudden silence seemed to startle everyone, including Ranger, who shook his massive head as if clearing water from his ears. What happened next unfolded so quickly, Thomas could barely process it. With a snarl that would chill any man's blood, Ranger launched himself at his former handler, all 90 pounds of muscle and fury driving the man to the ground. The other two operatives reached for their weapons, but Thomas's training took over. A well-placed shot took out the helicopter's searchlight, plunging the scene into darkness. In the confusion, he grabbed Ranger's collar and ran for the tree line. They crashed through the underbrush until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Hours later, as dawn painted the sky in pastels, Thomas and Ranger watched from a secluded beach as the black helicopter circled impotently in the distance before finally turning away. In the weeks that followed, Thomas used every connection from his special ops days to disappear. New identities, untraceable accounts, a remote cabin in the Pacific Northwest where the only sounds were wind through pine trees and the occasional eagle's cry. As he watched Ranger sprawl contentedly before the stone fireplace, gnawing on a beef bone without a care in the world, Thomas finally understood. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a rebirth. For both of them, the past with its shadows and secrets could stay buried. What mattered now was the life ahead, one they would choose for themselves on their own terms. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and Ranger lifted his head to answer, his voice strong and free,